Today we're going to talk about reducing adjective clauses. When we reduce an adjective clause, it becomes an adjective phrase. It's not a clause anymore because it doesn't have a subject and verb anymore. So we're going to focus on the rules for reducing adjective clauses to adjective phrases and looking at some examples. So we're going to use a text that I adapted from one of my favorite grammar textbooks. It's from the blue Betty Azar grammar book. I've made a few changes to it to help us practice this grammar. So our first rule for reducing adjective clauses is that we can only do it if the relative pronoun is the subject of the clause. If you need to review subject and object relative pronouns, I'll link a video for you on that topic. So let's get started reading the first paragraph of our text. It says, as you know, a computer needs to have an operating system in order to run programs. When most people think about the first operating systems that were developed for the personal computer, Microsoft or Bill Gates may be the first names that you think of. Actually, the truth is somewhat different. So let's look at the two adjective clauses in this paragraph. Our first one is that were developed for the personal computer. And this is describing the first operating systems. It's telling us which ones. So in this clause, you can see our relative pronoun that is the subject of the clause, and we can reduce it to an adjective phrase. Now, our first rule for how to reduce these clauses is for clauses that have the subject relative pronoun and a be verb. So we see that were developed. In this case, our be verb is were, and our subject relative pronoun is that. In this case, with the subject relative pronoun and the be verb, we can delete them, and now we have an adjective phrase, a reduced adjective clause. When many people think about the first operating systems developed for the personal computer, Microsoft or Bill Gates may be the first names that you think of. That's our first rule, is that subject relative pronoun with a be verb, we delete them both, and we have an adjective phrase. In this case, the be verb was part of a passive, it might be part of a progressive verb, or it might be with an adjective, anything with that subject relative pronoun and a be verb. All right, let's look at our next clause. Microsoft and Bill Gates may be the first names that you think of. In this case, our relative pronoun is that, and it's actually the object of this clause, so we cannot reduce this to an adjective phrase. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, but we can delete that. We can delete the relative pronoun, and that's true. We can delete that relative pronoun, but it's still an adjective clause. It's not reduced to an adjective phrase because it still has subject and verb, you think. Anyway, that's a sidetrack. Let's look at our next paragraph. In the late 1970s, there was a man in Seattle who worked for a company that was called Seattle Computer. Let's focus on that sentence first. We actually have two adjective clauses here. Who worked for a company. This is describing a man. And that was called Seattle Computer. Let's do this one first. That was called Seattle Computer. This follows the same rule as our first one. We have that, a subject relative pronoun, and a be verb, was. So we can delete these two, and then called Seattle Computer is our adjective phrase. Now let's go back to the one right before it. Who worked for a company. Now this one has who, it's a subject relative pronoun, but worked, we don't have a be verb. So in this case, with our subject relative pronoun, but not a be verb, we have to do something a little bit different. We still can delete the subject relative pronoun, and then we change the verb to an ing verb. So our sentence becomes, in the late 1970s, there was a man in Seattle working for a company called Seattle Computer. So we have our two adjective phrases reduced from adjective clauses. All right, let's continue. He was a computer programmer and needed an operating system for his computer. Patterson got tired of waiting for another company to create one and decided to develop his own program. He called it QDOS, which meant Quick and Dirty Operating System. It took him about 4 months to develop it. So we have a couple of options here. We have which is our subject relative pronoun, and that means that we can reduce it to an adjective phrase, and we can do it in a couple of ways. We can follow the same way that we did before by deleting and adding ing, and that's grammatically correct. Another way that we look at clauses like this, which this is a non-restrictive or non-identifying adjective clause, is we could actually make it look like an appositive where it's giving a definition for QDOS. We could say he called it QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System. Sometimes we'll make those into just sort of definition phrases. Those adjective phrases just are a definition offset by commas. But I'll leave it like this, meaning quick and dirty operating system. It took him about 4 months to develop it. All right, let's go to our last paragraph. At the same time, Microsoft was quietly looking for an operating system to run a personal computer that IBM was developing. Microsoft saw the program that Patterson had written, and in 1980 paid him $25,000 for a license for DOS. Let's look at those first two in the paragraph, because they both follow sort of the same pattern. We see that IBM was developing. In this case, that is an object relative pronoun. We have subject IBM and verb was developing. So because that is an object relative pronoun, we cannot reduce this to an adjective phrase. And the same is true for the second one. That Patterson had written, that is an object relative pronoun in this case, so we cannot reduce this clause. It stays how it is. So let's look at our very last one of the writing. It says Microsoft, which is one of the biggest software companies in the world, became very successful using Patterson's operating system. Here we see we have which is a subject relative pronoun in this clause, and a be verb. So we can delete these, and this is what we call an appositive. It gives sort of a definition for the noun that we're modifying, Microsoft. Gives some sort of a definition or a description just within those commas of the non-restrictive or non-identifying adjective clause.